Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just a reminder, obviously, about the microphones tonight. It's being webcast again. Apologies for absence.
We have an apology from Councillor Hart, and Councillor Connolly is the substitute for the current vacant Green seat on the committee.
Thank you. Welcome, Maura. Minutes of the meeting of the 28th of May. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to read them, but I recognise that there's only two people in the room that were at the meeting. So any changes, alterations, or anything? Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer, Jeffrey, thank you very much, and seconder, thank you, Sue. We have a show of hands for the two that are here, and me as well. Those in favour? Thank you, that's carried unanimously. Assuming those abstentions, everyone else? Thank you, yes. So that is carried. I suppose announcements. I haven't really got anything tonight. I know Maura's here because there's a change of the political balance, so we now have another Green member sitting on the team. So welcome. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest concerning this evening's agenda? No? Thank you very much. Right. First agenda item, the External Auditor's Completion Report 23/24. Paul.
Thank you. So there's a bundle of reports that we have with you this evening, and essentially these documents will in totality have mean that we're all caught up in terms of where we need to be from the previous backlog of reports and findings and opinions, etc., etc., etc. So the first report that we have is what it's calling the audit completion report. This is for the 2023-24 audit. The backstop for issuing the opinion for this audit was back in February. Obviously, that couldn't be done because your predecessor auditors hadn't concluded yet on 22-23, and equally the 23-24 accounts hadn't been produced by the council, and they were produced on the 30th of April. What members who've been around for a couple of years may recall, we commenced this audit back in November 23, and so this is the sort of the end part of this. The report details the work that we have done, which essentially we did all of the planning work, all of our work on the IT general controls, and we've reported all those in the report as well. And we've also undertaken all of our value for money work in terms of the 22-23 audit year. This was work which we'd commenced over the past sort of 18 months or so, but couldn't conclude until predecessor auditor had also concluded. Because their conclusion was towards the end of April, and this was produced end of August, well, July and during August. In terms of what the predecessor auditor raised as recommendations, we had no expectation that they'd have been all done and dusted, despite the fact this is the following year's report, because there'd only be a passage of a few months from when the last report was issued and this one. So in terms of what we did in terms of value for money, we updated the review in terms of the position for 23-24 in terms of the finances and the financial sustainability. Documented in a bit more detail some of the wider arrangements that are in place across all three code criteria, and then considered the progress that had been made in terms of the recommendations that had been raised. I'll go into more detail in that for the sort of annual auditor's report, which is follows this one. And in terms of this one, in terms of the accounts, because the backstop date has passed, the requirement is that we issue our disclaimer of opinion as soon as reasonably practicable, and that this committee date it was the first reporting opportunity in terms of doing that. The report is as read, and as such, beyond the work that we have done, there's no opinion we'll be giving on the financial statements because we are disclaiming it. But in terms of this particular report, if I pause there before moving on to the value for money side of things, happy to take any questions if there are any on this particular report before moving on to value for money.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments by any member or the independents? No. That's so your value for money is part of this agenda item. Yeah. Okay.
The value for money is contained in what's called the auditor's annual report, very similarly named, so it can make it confusing. We look at the 3 code criteria. We've done this work in full. The recommendations raised. So one of the things we looked at was how did the council respond to the statutory recommendations that were raised in the prior year. There were 3 recommendations raised, all within the governance criterion, and they all related to the production of the accounts. As I say, we've had discussions with the CFO and team. We had no expectation, and I think it would be unreasonable to expect all that would have been dealt with within a matter of months from it was last reported. But we're satisfied in terms of this particular report, in terms of the thinking that's been responded to, and sort of the plans that are in place, but also satisfied that the council responded from a legal perspective to the statutory nature of the recommendations raised. So the meeting was held in public, they were appropriately discussed and dealt with, and follow-up of those has been reverted to this committee. So for that reason, whilst the recommendations remain in place, we are not labelling them as statutory, because I don't think there'd be any benefit, to be honest, in re-raising them in a statutory basis, given that that's already been dealt with and they're not substantially different. In terms of the other recommendations that we've made, there were none that we've been able to close down, and again, that's not a criticism. That's just a reflection of the short period for catch-up that's in place. But there are 2 elements where we've added additional elements. One is within the governance arrangements itself, and within the finance team capacity, we've slightly strengthened the requirement for a forward-looking basis, which is as you move now, and as this tonight's meeting will move us very close to the catch-up position, that 25-26 will be the year where we'll be intending to be able to undertake a full audit. Obviously, for that to happen, there'll be a lot of remedial work that's needed as part of that review of finance team workflow, capacity, structure and infrastructure that's in place to enable that to happen. And so we've added that to the governance recommendation. The other one reflects the change in the external environment that's happened from when the backlog first arose, and that is primarily down to the government plans for local government reorganisation and devolution. And it reflects the fact that whilst they are on the very early stages, there is an element of a ministerial, certainly with the previous local government minister, requirement to consider the decisions, any major decisions, in the light of what that local government reorganisation may look like. And so some of the plans that the council had in place, particularly in terms of asset disposals with a view to strengthening financial resilience, there's an added component that will need to be factored into some of those decisions. I'm not saying that I think that's the wrong thing to do, and certainly in terms of the plans that the council has in place in order to recover and strengthen its financial resilience. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but you just need to be able to demonstrate that in doing that, you're thinking not only of East Herts, but also of what may be in the future. A challenging one, because nobody knows what the future configuration may look like, but it is just one of those external factors. So we've added that in as well in terms of a recommendation to add that component to some of the decision-making processes that take place. So in that respect, the value for money work, the 3 significant weaknesses remain within governance in terms of financial statements, and we'll follow that up in terms of our next the 24-25 work, which will be coming to you in a couple of months, which is as part of the sort of catch up that we're doing through this year, so that we're all back on track. And obviously the other recommendations in there, which we will also follow up as we work through the 24-25 work over the next few months. The other documents in front of you, one is obviously the financial statements themselves, which are here for approval for this evening. The format of the draft disclaimer of opinion that we propose to issue, subject to approval of the accounts, and also the letter of management representations, which we share, which management would then sign and give to us in order for us to be able to issue the opinion. And those representations, relatively standard, they're asked of all people, and they're essentially areas where we're relying on management's confirmation of a negative, and therefore it's very difficult to prove the opposite of a negative. Happy to take any questions that members may have on any of the documents related to 23-24 within this particular agenda item.
Thank you very much, Paul. Comments, questions? Anything at all? Sue.
I just want to say thank you, because you've covered most of the things that I had raised as questions in your statement. Thank you.
Okay. On that basis then, the recommendation for the committee is to receive and make any comments on the external auditor's completion report for 23-24 and the annual auditor's report 23-24, and to approve the 23-24 statement of accounts. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Sue proposing. Thank you very much. Anyone seconding? Oh, thank you, David. Could I have a show of hands? Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. That is carried. The external report view again then, Paul? The auditor's report, sorry.
Still audit plan, yeah.
Yes.
So right. So with no further ado, we go straight from 23-24 and closing that down and straight into 24-25. So a little bit of background again. So in terms of the sort of national backlog of audits that was in place across the country, what we didn't want to do, despite the fact that obviously 23-24 was delayed and then further delayed beyond the backstop date, we didn't want to fall any further behind, and we had to in terms of 24-25. So in an ordinary year, we'd be bringing this to roughly around about the March committee ahead of the production of the 24-25 financial statements. We commenced the work earlier in the year, so a lot of the work that went in that's gone into this plan was done throughout the year, and there's sufficient work has been done to enable us to report to you in terms of what this audit plan is saying. It is essentially the audit plan if in a normal world for the 24-25 audit of the financial statements. Council produced the statements on time and in line with the statutory requirements at the 30th of June, which was no small feat, given that it was only a couple of months after the 23-24 accounts had been produced. Clearly what we'd been having to do though is then catch up in terms of the audit planning and the audit work that we needed to do in order to issue the plan once 23-24 and earlier years was out the way. If I take you through the key parts of this plan, and I say under a sort of contextual caveat that a good chunk of this is work that we won't be able to do, but would have done had we had, you know, if there weren't a backstop, essentially that's coming up in the next sort of 4 or 5 months or so. The plan sets out the materiality levels for the audit, so the levels of the detail that we'd go into in terms of looking at the financial statements, and which was set out on page 19 of the report, but it also gives you quite a bit of detail about how we plan to recover the assurance and recover the disclaimed position to get back to a position of clean opinions over the next few years. A couple of months ago, so during our planning work, the government or the NAO released its latest bit of statutory guidance. There's a series of items of statutory guidance called Local Audit Recovery and Reset Implementation Guidance, or LARIG, as it's shortened to, and LARIG 6 was released a couple of months ago. That was the one which, following requests from firms for further detail and guidance, because this is a relatively unprecedented position, provided a little bit more detail in terms of some of the specifics that's required in order to build back assurance. It mirrored the plans that we'd already arrived at as a firm, which was quite reassuring in the sense of the work we've done to date, and sort of confirmed that the plans that we did have. In a nutshell, to build back assurance over your balance sheet, you need 3 clean years worth of, or 3 years worth of clean audits. That's to build up the current year, or whatever the current year balance sheet is in 3 years' time. It have also built up the comparators, essentially next year's audit, and the third balance sheet, the opening position, which would essentially be your 25-26 audit. Our intention over the next 3 years is to build those up. What the LARIG does also is provide or require auditors to undertake a very comprehensive risk assessment of the environment that was in place back over the disclaimed period, and obviously before we became auditors from 23-24, and to use that risk assessment to inform the risk, which will in turn drive the extent, nature, scope and depth of the audit work we need to do going back over the disclaimed periods in order to return to a clean opinion. So what we've done in this is provide a little bit of a high level overview, and I appreciate it does get very complicated the further we go into this, on where we need to get to. I think the for me personally, the sort of the visual ones are the ones that are most helpful, and you can see on page 15, it sets out roughly year by year what we would be aiming to do, starting from next year's audit, where we'll have the benefit of a full year's worth, assuming the next year's accounts come out on time, and we'll have obviously planned in our planning work so that the planning work is completed before the accounts are produced. We will have the intention to get next year's balance sheet closed. The following year you get 2 balance sheets, and by 27-28, if everything falls into place, that's when we'll be looking to move to a clean opinion. Coincidentally, and it is genuinely coincidentally, that is also the date which is potentially, under the government plans, the final year of East Herts Council in its current form as a standalone district council, and assuming that from the 1st of April 2028 the new unitary authority, in whatever format that takes, it becomes a successor body. What that would mean, if we're able to comply with these timescales, is that East Herts would be going into that successor body with clean opinion accounts, which would be probably better than in many parts of the country, but secondly, clearly would be a fantastic sort of outcome. That being said, it is challenging to do, and I think part of the challenge is it's been several years since the council has had a full proper audit. And in arriving that, we will not only need to be doing the current year's work for the next 3 years, we'll also need to be building back assurance over the years that have been missed in order to gain assurance over the general fund position. So the call on the finance team will be significant. And that's why we in the 23-24 VFM have strengthened the recommendation about the need for capacity to be there, because it can't all fall on the shoulders of 1 or 2 people to do the day job, the budgets, the planning for LGR, and for the additional need that will be there in order to respond to the audit, in order to achieve that timescale in the first place. So what we won't be doing is coming back and saying, well, we haven't done what we wanted to do because finance didn't give us what we needed. We'd be reporting, well, if we haven't been able to achieve these timescales, the context behind that, which is the pull on the finance team, is going to get harder and harder and harder over the next 3 years. And the pull on management's headspace is going to be increasingly taken up with the transition of future plans and all of the requirements that will bring as well. So in a perfect world, it's doable. In the real world, there's obviously going to be challenge, and we'll be sort of speaking with Brian over the next 6 months or so as we go into that, as to what that may mean in terms of what is achievable, what's doable, and how the arrangements are looking in response to the statutory recommendations that the predecessor auditor raised. In terms of this audit plan, we also set out what we consider at the moment to be the key risks that would be in place over the financial statements. It's important to stress, I think, that those risks are not risks because we think there's anything particularly wrong within East Herts. They are risks which are either mandatory in terms of management override and control risks, and or which are inherently there because of the nature of the balances, and in particular the size and subjectivity of the asset valuation, and the size and subjectivity of the pensions liabilities or valuations sitting within the financial statements. Those risks are likely to continue to be the risks over the next few years as well. So we set those out here, and you get a feel for where sort of the audit focus will be as we go to build back assurance. The incorrect capitalization of revenue expenditure, again, is heightened just simply because there have been large capital programs. There's been several years of not being audited, and so one of the things that we'll need to check as we build back and as we go forward will be that spend is being appropriately capitalized between capital and revenue, depending on the nature of what's in place. On top of that, you had the joy of IFRS 16. That is audit speak for a new standard which is in place from 24-25, essentially requiring the council to identify all potential assets that are within a contract that are not on the balance sheet, and to consider whether they should be on the balance sheet, depending on whether it meets the conditions of this standard. The good news is, because the 24-25 opinion is highly likely to be disclaimed too, it won't actually affect the outcome of the opinion for the 24-25 work. But what we will do is discuss if we think there's anything that hasn't been done that should be. We'll aim to discuss that so that when it comes to 25-26, that can all be put in place for next year's financial statements reporting. And then the other thing that we will look at, and because it's key to build back as well, will be in terms of the minimum revenue provision. Again, this balance hasn't been audited for several years. It's a very technically dry technical accounting concept with a lot of legal regulations around it. For the previous a few years ago, the council didn't have one minimum revenue provision on the basis that its interpretation of the guidance and the regulations that it didn't require one. There is now one in there. The specifics of how it's being calculated obviously won't be subject to an audit opinion, although next year we'll be looking at in more detail. It is relatively low as a percentage of the capital financing requirement and as a percentage of borrowing. And it can sometimes be the case that the provision is wholly correctly calculated in accordance with the regulations and guidance, but is still not quite prudent enough in terms of that sort of prudence sense check. So that's something we will look at in a bit more detail. Often, if in a situation like this, it's because either the provision is being spread over a period in excess of 50 years, or there's a sort of a backloading of cost, because the assumption is that these assets in question will only be releasing benefits to the council in a later period. Obviously, that brings some risk to it, but that's something we've sort of flagging here as something we'll be looking into, but also again, not something that's going to impact the nature of the opinion that eventually gets issued for 24-25 for this year's backstop. And then in terms of value for money side of things, in terms of our plan, not surprisingly, it's a relatively straight roll forward. So the closing position of the report I just went through becomes the opening position of this report, and we'll follow up those areas of focus as I mentioned previously. I think those are the key elements to set out in terms of the audit plan, but again, happy to take any questions from members in terms of 24-25, or in particular the sort of the build back process, if that's of interest to members.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. It's seems very thorough. Before I open it up to the members, you mentioned about the challenges being the resourcing. How would you envisage that being reported back into this committee?
So it would come by and large through our so the audit completion report for 23-24 we just did. It would be in future versions of that. What we'd be looking to set out is on a more granular basis the work we wanted to do and whether or not we achieved it, and if not, what were the barriers to it. Those barriers could be very wide. It could be, for example, that the records simply weren't there. It could be that it just took longer than envisaged because of the nature of the requirement, or it could equally be that there is just too much of a pull on the finance team for them to be able to respond to this and the budget and the LGR and some of the wider contextual context in terms of that. So it would come in a future report from us in terms of as we're reporting the outcome of audits over the years to come.
Thank you. Ryan?
Thank you, Chair. So just on that, a report will be coming to the next Audit and Governance in November with an update of where we are in relation to the action points from the both statutory recommendations that was issued by EY, the previous auditor, but also from the finance peer review that was carried out a couple of years ago. Obviously, that will pick up some of those issues around resources and how we are managing that.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else for questions or comments relating to this? Sue?
Yeah, I just wondered this way. Hello, this way of working is I'm bound to be more costly for the council, and I wondered what risk, financial risk that's putting the council at in extra costs.
No, it's a really good question. So you're quite right. So the normal audit, for want of a better phrase, is the normal scale fee that PSAA sets. It doesn't include the cost of additional work. For example, that risk assessment that I mentioned earlier in terms of the disclaim period and additional bill back work over prior year balances. That would be additional cost. However, the government has said it has set aside funding for all councils where that work would be funded centrally, so there'd be additional sort of grant funding to come in for it. There are two core conditions. One is that you produce your accounts on time each year. Obviously, for 4-5, that was done, and if that continues to be the case for 5-6 and later, that's the first core condition met. And the second is that your audit fees have been paid, which again is a relatively easy one to. They will only fund it if once you've paid, essentially. In terms of the reporting of the fees, the fee section of these reports is potentially going to become more complex than the audit side of things. There's a lot of detail that we'll be going into that PSAA also would like to see, but also I think it's good for transparency. So you'll be able to see what's normal in-year audit work that we've done that's just your normal scale fee, what's additional work that we did that's contributing towards bill back, what's additional work that's arisen as a result of, for example, some of the significant weaknesses on the VFM, and what's additional work that's arisen because of problems within the either arrangements in place or things took longer because of essentially avoidable costs as on top. So you'll get all that detail coming in the reports to come, but they will be funded unless the government is of the view that it's wholly the council's fault that these additional costs have occurred.
Thank you for that. Any more comments, Mark?
Yeah, interested that if it's good that a report coming in November, because I think a lot of this is about reporting, as you say, Chair, and also resources. I'm interested in how we perhaps compare with others, not not without naming other authorities, but how does East Herts compare with other councils in a similar situation?
So I think as councils go, in terms of if I look at the complexity of your accounts, then they're not sitting. No local government accounts are simple, but it doesn't have some of the complexities that some of your other neighbours in Hertfordshire have, for example. So there aren't any huge investment type scheme, unique investment type schemes that exist in some of the others that we're working with in Hertfordshire or indeed across the country. So your accounts, I would put in sort of the mid-range in terms of complexity. And I mention that first only because part of the backlog is because as these accounts have become more complicated, even relatively simple accounts have become longer to audit, required more from all finance teams to respond to. But they're not at the simplest end, but they're not at the worst end either in terms of those elements. In terms of where you are in terms of backstop, I think I'm not sure. I think the figure was around about 50% of the country. I think is disclaimed at the moment. So as disclaimers go, you're certainly not in a minority in that position. Where you are in a minority is having missed the previous backstop. But from this year, because I see no reason why we won't all collectively meet the February 2026 backstop, that will have gone away as well, and you'll be within to a normal cycle essentially. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that you are, and I guess the other thing to compare is in terms of statutory recommendations. You possibly are in a minority there, but I think that's because everywhere they've been raised, they are driven by specific issues, and I think the missing of the first statutory backstop date, I think would have been a key trigger from with the predecessor auditor in terms of that. But from what we've seen, and certainly the response since Bryant started, and the thinking that's in place about how that's going to be recovered and what's going to be happening to the arrangements, I think it's looking promising in terms of being able to meet statutory backstops going forward from now on.
Thank you, Nick. I had two questions. Mark's
nicked one of them. So it was about the comparability, which was really helpful. I do like the charts that show the build back year by year. I think it's really really clear. My other question, maybe more for Brian, the build back work is going to require a lot of looking back at old records over the last 3 or 4 years. I just wondered how confident you are that record keeping over that period is going to support the information that the auditors are going to need to see.
So obviously, council's got a responsibility to retain all financial records for 6 years plus the current year. So, I'm not anticipating there should be a major concern. There might be odd documents here and there that might have been gone missing over time, where individuals might have left and didn't store it on a shared drive. But the day-to-day transactional will be on our general ledger system, which obviously shows all the invoices as well. So we should be mostly there. Again, I can't say that for 100% just yet until we go through that process.
Thank you very much. Any more questions or points, Sue?
I just want to say thank you for the style of report you produced, and there's a lot of transparency, honesty, and it reads like a critical friend, and it's refreshing read as far as it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. On that basis, then there is a single recommendation, page 195 of the agenda pack, and that recommendation is for the committee to receive and make any comments on the external auditor's audit plan for 24-25. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer, Sue, thank you. And a seconder, Maura, thank you very much. Could we have a show of hands, those for? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, and carried. Agenda item 7, the annual procurement report. Kirsten.
Thank you. I'm pleased to present what is our first annual procurement report. It's come about from an audit recommendation in the past that the procurement activity should be reported on a regular basis. With 3 things we'd like you to consider. We are aiming to take up to executive asking executive to approve delegated authority to the relevant director, and this may be amended to director and portfolio holder, to commence procurement for the forthcoming activities listed. It's a requirement of the Constitution that procurements over 200,000 go on the forward plan before we start procurement. That timing can occasionally be a little awkward because executive doesn't meet every month, and there's several weeks in the lead up to an executive meeting. So the whole process gets stretched out a lot. So for those procurements we're aware of at this point, I'd like to get those through the forward plan process so that they are able to commence as and when they're needed to. Would you like me to go through the upcoming?
Sorry, could I just say, are you going to go through all of the projects, or?
I might just touch on a couple.
Good, thank you.
Pantomime production is one that will be on the horizon very soon. It's quite an unusual and exciting one for us, and that will be using our new Procurement Act PA23 procedures that we went live in February. So this will be our first opportunity to really use the advantages of that new procurement regulations. The business support in Bishop Stortford is actually related to Launchpad, so we might change the title of that before it goes to exec. And that one may or may not happen. It depends what happens with the building in which it sits. So I can't guarantee all of these will come forward in the year, but our current forecast is for these to come forward. Debt Recovery Agency, that is something that is going on at the moment, but there are multiple arrangements across both parking and the Revs and Bens, and we feel it would be better to bring those together as one procurement, which might get us better value for money. but most of these are procurements that the current contract is coming to an end. We really have no choice but to re-procure. Looking on at the other aspects of this report, procurement strategy was approved in March, which includes an action plan. So I've just noted the actions that we have been able to commence and we've made some progress on. And just to allow you to note what we achieved in the last year. You'll notice upcoming, we've got rather more to do than we did last year, but that's the nature of procurement. It does tend to go in cycles. Some years will have a lot, some years will have few, and some procurements are more complicated than others, which isn't always related to their value. And as an appendix to this, I have listed out some of the things we'll be doing in further years on from now, or at least we believe currently we will. So has anyone got any questions?
Thank you very much for that. Any questions or comments? Nick, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, obviously procurement rules have changed and social value rules kicked in. Is there sort of a training program to keep the broader staff up to date around that?
Yes, we regularly run an introduction to procurement course and a managing the tender process course. Those courses have been updated following our new regulations, and we also updated the council's contract procedure rules in the spring. So those courses have been relaunched and we're sort of playing catch up with those. We've got set run in September, we've got more in October, forecast for January and March, which will release soon.
Okay, thank you. The second question, if I may, just wondering how procurement links with perhaps the sort of operational delivery and the monitoring of work. So you obviously take it through to letting a contract to waste or catering or whatever. Is there any link then between the actual management of that contract once it's let from a procurement perspective?
We're relatively hands-off, although with our new regulations we'll have to be a lot more hands-on to produce more regular notices about what's happening with all of those procurements.
Mm-hmm.
We do regularly touch base with the contract managers to talk about, so when are you going to re-procure it then? Because it's surprising how quickly those years go by. I'm already in discussions about grounds maintenance, although that is years away, but it does need talking about this early.
Okay. And sorry, finally, as is the sort of cross-cutting this work, and so it's not sort of within each individual department. So using your grounds maintenance example, you'd have people from across the authority that would be involved in reletting of that.
I mean, my main contact will be the contract manager there, but I know they do talk across the council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just great to see annual report on procurement. I know it was as you say, as a recommendation, first time it's come through. I think it's great to see the activity that has happened as well as is going to happen. One of the things maybe be really helpful if we've got the strategy attached as an annex is in the annual report to see how the procurements that we have delivered, how that's delivered against the principles within the strategy. So we've got the 5 principles to sort of understand whether these procurements, how successful they've been in meeting those. I think we really just a really helpful addition in the report, so we can assess how well we're doing.
Yeah, very good point. Yes, Bob.
That's a really small question. Apologies. On page, I can't see the page number. Sorry. There's a reference to agency framework extension. Could you just explain what agency framework extension amounts to? What is it?
We have an agreement. We use a framework of agreement to procure our vendor neutral provider of temporary agency staff. Sorry, that doesn't really help, does it? I'm sorry. Not all procurements that we do are completely East Herts centric. for items such as temporary staff agencies, there are procuring contracting authorities who procure a framework that we can all use to acquire consultants, temporary staff, gas and electricity, common goods and services. So vendor neutral agency firms are available off a framework, and it is likely that we will use a framework to re-procure that particular service. Sorry, that's a little complicated.
I wasn't ready for vendor neutral, sorry. I've got a sort of a little mini supplementary, a little bit higher up the paper. There's a reference to project temporary staff. These are not the same things, and I take it from your answer. You wouldn't call temporary staff neutral, would you really? That's right, that's a small joke, it's okay. But they're not the same, are they?
Actually they are the same.
Oh, they are the same.
Yeah.
Oh. So how do they, in terms of numbers, how do they interact? Does this mean that actually we're looking, if you start with a temporary staff item, which is within $1 million over 3 to 5 years, and then you drop down to the agency framework, which is 500,000 over 6 months. When you put all those things together, how much is that area of our procurement going to cost us?
That one runs about £1 million a year. So we've just reletting a short-term contract to give ourselves the time and space to do a longer-term contract. So we will, going forward, let a contract for, and we're still in discussions at the minute about what the right length is, for 3 to 5 years to get that under contract for the forthcoming future, rather than what we've done in the last couple of years is sort of 1 year at a time.
So final thing then, does that mean that you've just told us that we are probably going to spend £1 million a year on temporary staff?
When we advertise, we forecast it slightly higher than we expect, just in case. What we actually spend in the end may be considerably less. That's not within the gift of procurement.
Any more questions, Maura?
Thank you. The report was really interesting following the strategy from last year. All the way through the report, there's good assurance on the approach to tackle climate change and so reducing greenhouse gas emissions, restoring the natural environment. Are we happy that we've got enough expertise within the department to really support every one of these projects? I mean, the one that jumped out of the page at me was weed spray. I mean, I was just shocked that that just wasn't part of a grounds maintenance contract. So, you know, that in itself to me feels like it needs a project to address it, to see what chemicals we're using, what we can reduce, what different methods we can use. But that's quite a piece of work, and if you do that type of work across a lot of these projects, that's costly. Are you happy that you can manage those commitments in the report?
The procurement team itself is a support service, so that kind of detail on the specification of the particular contract will be sort of led by the contract management team, so in the grounds maintenance area. So that sort of thought process of what exactly the specification needs to be is led by them, and we're their sort of critical friend. So I believe they have the expertise, but we look as a critical friend, and in certain areas of spend, we've developed a fair amount of knowledge over the years.
Yeah.
And we do get them to talk with their neighbours in Stevenage or Hertsmere that we also support. So there is more resource behind it than at first appears.
Okay, thank you. And then a second question on the local government reform and the kind of when we're looking at the horizon of that, but setting off new contracts now, are we at risk of giving our new unitary authority a real headache that there's so many contracts they're going to have to see through? We've heard with the waste contracts currently that there's councils in the country that can't conform with the government's new guidelines. So are you factoring that into the new contracts?
We're very much factoring in conversations around length of contract, because obviously we need to procure a length of contract that actually produces value for money for the council now.
Yeah.
But we need them to not end at a really awkward point.
Yeah.
So yes, that's very much part of our conversations now about what the right length is and the right length of possible extension is to get us to the other side in a good place.
Or sometimes would it be not even set up a contract, but find another way of getting a particular service? If it's,
the conversations are always, do we do it or do we buy it?
Okay.
Do we share this? Do we, how are we going to achieve the outcome we need to achieve? But yeah, the focus on how long will it exist for, what's the best finish point for this, is now part of the conversation.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, Brian.
Just going back to your first point and obviously the other points as well, I think obviously procurement is here as a provider expert support around the procurement rules and so forth. It'll be down to the individual directorates to actually manage that, to make sure they've got the appropriate resources in-house to carry out that process. So it's down to each of the directors to make sure there is the competency within their teams to manage those contracts. I think in relation to LGR, yes, a lot of work is going on in the backgrounds with obviously not only CFOs and chief execs, but also with all the other procurement teams, IT teams, to look at all these potential issues with obviously contracts. At the moment, there is no restrictions on what we can do, but as time moves along, there will be obviously more information coming out from central government around, when we can and can't potentially enter into new contract without maybe referring it on to the new board or the new body in due course.
Thank you, Brian. Sue?
I was just wondering about the Beam contract. Is it an improved offer on what's available at the moment? In regards income, I know that the kitchens haven't been open. I just wondered if it was a new arrangement that would provide more income.
Go on, Ben.
I can pick that one up, Councillor Nichols. This Beam's under myself. Now, in terms of you're talking about the catering contract, yeah. So you're right. So the we there is a kitchen built, but obviously there was no staff in it when we opened it. It was a bit of an oversight, possibly. I'm pleased to announce that we have now employed a chef, and there is a menu ready to go, and it is being soft launched this week. So if you do go in there and happen to hang around the cafe, you will notice there's a menu on the table. With sort of light bites and lunch on offer, and that's Wednesday through to Saturday, which is all good news. Then that'll be tested out and refined just to see how many covers we can handle, and then it'll be properly launched in a couple of weeks. So it's a bit more formal. That's why you probably won't have seen any comms yet. So obviously we've been buying food ingredients so far, but we haven't reached the thresholds for actually needing to properly procure it. But I think sooner or later we will have to do so, assuming this food offer kind of takes off. So yeah, it's completely new, but hopefully it should be a really good thing. All the items on the menu have been carefully thought through in terms of the profit margins. So we are making a bit of money on each dish. So yes, that's where we are.
Thank you very much. Any more for any more? Who? This is there's one recommendation for this.
So we can just remind members that there is a change to the recommendation B, which is now saying to approve delegated authority in conjunction with the portfolio holder. And that's been added to the executive report, but it's not on the audit report. Yeah, but recommendation for executive under B has been amended on the executive papers.
Thank you, Brian. Just 1 minute.
Executive will now say to approve delegated authority to the relevant director in conjunction with the portfolio holder. So it's more for executive, but just wanted to make sure audit and governance members are aware that that is a change to the papers.
Yeah, sorry about this. So 2 recommendations then, to consider the report and make comment before it goes to the executive, and to approve delegated authority to the relevant. Oh, yeah.
We update members to say that on the executive papers, the recommendation, which is B on here, which should be A on theirs, has been changed. Yes.
No, thank you very much. So yes, revert to the original. The recommendation is to consider the report and make comment before it goes forward to the executive. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer is David, seconder is Sue. Thank you. And could we have a show of hands, those 4? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, and carried. Agenda item 8. This is back to you again, Ben. The Assets of Community Value Report 2025.
Thank you, Chair. It's my annual outing to Audit and Governance to talk about the wonderful world of assets of community value. I know you've all been awaiting this report eagerly, so delighted to be here. Yeah, it's the annual update on where we are. Not a great deal's changed since last year. In paragraph 2.25 there, I've just outlined the additions for this year. These are all the nominations. They're all put on the list. Some of them were re-nominations from earlier ones. Some of them were genuinely new. So they feed through to the appendix at the end. I suppose the other thing to note is the government have kind of toyed with some changes around the legislation, and as part of the devolution and community empowerment bill, they've kind of put out some suggestions around there may be some strengthening of the teeth around this legislation to make it a bit more impactful. So it actually enables communities to get hold of assets. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of detail behind that as yet. That's kind of referenced in the paper. They've talked about some aspects they may change around lengthening the moratorium period, widening the definition of what qualifies as an asset community value, but we're waiting for guidance. So I think the reality is that bit of legislation is very much focused on devolution, local government reorganisation. So it's somewhat understandable. That's where the major preoccupation is for the whole landscape of local government, and perhaps the assets of community value legislation's somewhat lower down the agenda. So I don't know how quickly that clarity will come forward. So in the meantime, we are carrying on in the current parameters. And that's probably all I've got to say about that.
Thank you very much, Ben. Any comments? Sue?
I just wondered, with the advent of devolution, whether there'll be more buildings at risk as councils try to offload their assets. Might there be a rush for new listings?
Yeah, possibly, I suppose. I mean, I think if you look at where the government are really coming from, that it's really focused on kind of village shops, pubs, and now kind of sporting facilities. Then I suppose some councils may wish to try and divest themselves ahead of going into unitary, but I would have thought if government get wind of that, they may try and stop it. I don't think any councils will try and offload anything that's making money. Maybe something where they got debts, which may be a bit harder to offload. So I don't know, Councillor Nichols, what may come out of this. Whether there'll be a new rush, I'm not sure. Obviously, what will happen it'll be the unitary authorities going forward that maintain the asset registers rather than the districts at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just like to say, I thought this is a very, very nice report, Ben, and you've highlighted that assets or rendering an asset of community value does not guarantee that nothing terrible will happen to it. I think it's very important that's in the paper, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to say that I'm particularly pleased to see that the land at County Hall has been designated an asset of community value. I think it's very important for the whole county, actually, but certainly for this area of Hertfordshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any more comments or questions? No. There is one recommendation, detail page 268 of the agenda pack, that the committee members review the asset register. Hopefully we've done this. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? A proposal, Bob, seconder, Maura. Thank you. Thank you very much. Show of hands, those for. That is unanimous, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. The shared agenda item 9, the shared anti-fraud services anti-fraud report 24/25. Darren, sorry, yes.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, members. I'm going to be presenting both SAS reports this evening on behalf of Nick Jennings, our Head of Service. For those that don't know me, I'm Darren Bowler, Accounts and Fraud Manager at the Shared Anti-Fraud Service. So the first item for the annual report. So SAS performance against the KPIs for the year is provided in a table at page 280 of your bundle. I'm pleased to say that all the KPIs were met. A key pillar in our work is prevention. We do this by raising awareness within the council. We provided the council with its fraud, anti-bribery and corruption policies. The delivery of training is key to that. Sessions were delivered on a variety of topics across the authority. Detail can be found at paragraph 18 of the report. One of the sessions was for the National Fraud Initiative, which was active in this period. Through our links to external providers and law enforcement, we are able to circulate updates and alerts on new and emerging fraud types and trends. Detail of this can be found at page 282, and on page 283 is an example of a fraud alert in relation to corporate impersonation. Referrals over the year remain broadly constant and consistent with the previous 2 years. The volume of referrals were made in relation to council tax and housing benefits, which is to be expected. It is encouraging to see that the reports from the public are at a good level, which generally indicates that the public has confidence in making them. Not all referrals are made into a case. Where the risk of value is low, or we apply a compliance method, and in the year 42 such cases identified £93,000 of council tax and housing benefit fraud. An example of this can be seen at page 286 of your bundle in the second case study. Of the 10 cases that were closed in the last financial year, 7 identified fraud recoverable losses of £342,000 and £62,000 in fraud savings in loss prevention for the following year. Housing allocation is an area of concern both nationally and regionally. SAFS works with the team managing the application process for housing. The data from the National Fraud Initiative exercise were reviewed and 113 records identified of concern, all were removed from the list. Paragraph 36 of the report explains the cost of housing fraud to the public purse within a paper entitled Lost Hope, Lost Homes. I recommend this as a must read to all members, not just those members of this committee. SAS also works with social housing providers in the districts, and case study 4 at page 287 explains how we do this. We recovered a property in the district that has been made available to a family unit on the housing waiting list. Case study 5 explains our work involving business rates and COVID grants, explains how we identified fraud over several years, which caused a loss to the council of £58,000, which is now being recovered, I'm pleased to say. Matching of data and analytics is both preventative and an aid to detection. Examples of this are given over pages 288 and 289, where the volume of the matches is provided, as well as the savings gained and loss prevented. This also included the use of the council tax framework, which is an analysis system to review liabilities, which identified £349,000 in 761 cases. I appreciate it's quite stat heavy, but I'm happy to take questions about anything that you've got in the report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darren. Any questions or comments? No. I think you got off lightly there, Darren. There is one 1 second. There are 2 recommendations, and they are to note the activity undertaken by the Shared Anti-Fraud Service to deliver the 24-25 audit and anti-fraud plan for the council, and secondly, to note all anti-fraud activities undertaken by officers and SAFS to protect the council against fraud in 24-25. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Anyone? Sue, proposing? David, thank you very much. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I've not given you the update on the next agenda item, which is the 25-26 progress report yet.
Yeah,
Sorry.
We're going to take that separate item, Darren. No.
No, thank you very much. Where were we? So seconder, so a show of hands, please. Is it 4? Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously. Now, Darren, point agenda item 10, the Anti-Fraud Service Progress Report 25-26.
My apologies. I thought you put them 2 together. So this is only over a very short period of this year because of when these reports have to be submitted and go through the process. So it only goes up to July of this year, having started in April. So in that period, a total of 26 allegations of fraud were received, with only 2 received from colleagues, which is a low number of referrals. 18 cases are live for investigation and 8 at the referral stage. The estimated loss is £129,000 for these allegations currently. Our work continues to support a variety of teams across the council with recovery of a large housing benefit loss within the Revs and Bens team, and the joint work with the DWP, and then also a business rates liability, which is now being recovered monthly. As Q2 comes to an end, our data matching efforts and analysis will move from the national initiative to the more locally focused fraud hub, matching our partners' data to each other and across national data sets too. Performance on our KPIs can be found at page 294, all of which are on target, and some of those have actually been met. As I say, it's a short report, so that's my summary, and I'm happy to take any questions at this point, Chair.
Thank you very much. Comments, questions, members and the independents? No? Okay, very well done. There is one recommendation, page 292 of the agenda pack, and that is to note the progress by officers and the Shared Anti-Fraud Service to deliver the anti-fraud plan for the council. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer Mora, seconder Jeffrey. And a show of hands, those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. You can obviously stay or leave if you want. Thank you. Agenda item 11, the Shared Internal Audit Service Progress Report. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. A little bit like the SAF's progress report. This is relatively short report in comparison to other ones that come later in the year. This is in fact the first progress report for 2025-26. It sets out details of internal audit activity to date, including the finalised internal audit reports that have been issued between April and the middle of September. It also shows the status of all internal audit work being delivered this financial year. So I'll highlight what I feel are the key points for you, if I may. Paragraph 2.2, that shows the outcome of 3 reports that have been finalised so far, including the associated assurance level and the number of recommendations made. All 3 audits do show a positive assurance rating, which is encouraging. Paragraph 2.3 summarises the status of all the audits included in the work plan. It's essentially showing a spread of work at various stages across the year. And we've obviously got more work to deliver as the year progresses. You can see sort of more detail on the status of all the planned work in both appendices A and C of the report. Paragraph 2.6 refers to the status of any outstanding high priority recommendations. Just the one this time. This relates to premises licensing and has a revised implementation date of December this year, with associated management comment included in the report showing that work on that recommendation is currently in progress. Lastly, paragraph 2.7 onwards to 2.10, that shows our performance indicators and how we currently stand. The key message to pick out is that we're probably a little bit behind the curve, particularly when you look at the appendix, which shows the profile of the work across the year. But we don't see any particular risk to delivering an annual assurance opinion at the end of the financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any questions or comments? Nick?
Just one question. In the external audit report we saw earlier, there was some recommendations around the technology work that your external auditors have done around the control environment and cyber security. In the internal audit report, we've got a reference to cyber security reliance on alternative assurance. I was just keen to understand what extra assurance is that giving us on top of what the external auditors have done, a fairly thorough piece of work. Thank you.
Yes, we like to look at cyber security on a fairly regular basis for what I hope are obvious reasons. To some extent, within the shared service, I hesitate to use the phrase audited to death, but with it being such a critical risk for both this council and the council's partner, Stevenage Borough Council, there are various sources of assurance in addition to internal audit that provide scrutiny of the council's cybersecurity arrangements. External audit being one. Both councils seek accreditation against a set of external standards, so that's another, for example. So rather than us re-audit what's already been audited, in effect, we like to place reliance where we're satisfied with the work that's been done on the work that others have been done. It minimises the audit exposure for the service, but we're still happy to provide a level of assurance and pick up any gaps where we perceive there might be. So it's essentially to avoid duplication.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any more questions or comments? No? On that basis, there are 2 recommendations on page 296 of the agenda pack, and they are to note the internal audit progress report and to note the implementation status of high priority. Could I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer Jeffrey, thank you very much. And a seconder? Sue, thank you very much. Show of hands, those in favour, those for? That is unanimous again and carried. Thank you. Agenda item 12. I think this is you, Alison. Provision outturn for 24-25 and draft statement of accounts 24-25. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the 2024-25 provisional outturn, 2024-25 draft statement of accounts. The position remains provisional at present, as the figures are still subject to the external audit process. As at the year end, £132,000 overspend is reported against the revenue budget, which is proposed to be funded from the General Reserve. Variances have been monitored and reported to members throughout the year, and Appendix B shows that significant variances against the net cost of services compared to the amounts reported as at Q3. Variances not previously reported are shown at the bottom of this appendix. During the last quarter of the year, reviews of the minimum revenue provision and capitalisation of interest were completed. The impact of these have resulted in reductions in expenditure against budgets of £281,000 and £340,000. During the year, the Council utilised £4.7 million of reserves to fund expenditure. Of this, £3 million was used to fund capital works at Beam, and £1.8 million was utilised to fund the loss in investment of the Lothbury Property Fund. This has been funded from a reserve specifically set aside for this purpose. Table 3 in the report shows the capital outturn position. £7 million was spent in 2024-25 against a budget of £19.15 million, given a variance of just over £12 million. Carry forward budgets of just under £9 million were approved as part of the 25-26 capital programme in February. Members are therefore asked to approve an additional £358,000 of carry forwards to 25-26. These are required in relation to schemes where expenditure has been either reprofiled or where retentions are still to be paid. The capital programme has been financed through a mix of borrowing, third-party contributions and revenue contribution, as shown in Table 4 of the report. Also presented are the 24-25 draft statement of accounts, which were included as Appendix D. These were published in line with statutory deadlines, and members are requested to note the receipt of the accounts. As mentioned earlier in the meeting, officers are working with assets to complete the audit of these by 27th February 2026. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Alison. Questions, comments? Anyone? Bob?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report. I've got possibly the predictable question which relates to the Lothbury Property Fund. I know this has come through this committee before. First of all, can I just make sure I'm understanding the figures correctly? In para 3.3, you make reference to a 1.857k pressure. So that is 1.8 million pounds pressure. Yeah. Okay. Simple question. Can you remind us why we're incurring this very substantial loss, please?
The property funds, we entered into 2 property funds in 2015, I believe it was, £10 million in each fund. The reason was those we had surplus income from the sale of council houses, so we had surplus income to invest. At that point, it was decided they would give us the best return for our money at that point. We have received interest above what we would have received if we'd have invested the money elsewhere during the last 10 years for those. However, both Lothbury and Hermes, who we're both invested in, have the terms have changed for the entry for those funds. And Lothbury, lots of people looking to disengage from the Lothbury Property Fund. Therefore, it wasn't viable for us to stay in it any longer. So we've been receiving, so the sale of the assets in the fund have been happening over the last year, and we've been receiving money back from those. Whilst it is a loss of £1.8 million on our original investment, the amount we have received in interest over that period covers that loss and more. So whilst there is a loss in the initial investment, the amounts returned to the council are higher than that loss.
Thank you, Brian.
Can I just add that that loss has been built up over a number of years where we've built it into the account. So it's not just been hitting this year's account. It's been in previous years as a potential bad debt. So it's been accrued for over a number of years.
Thank you, Brian. Any more questions, Bob?
Thank you very much. Insofar as you know, and I'm sorry if I'm a little bit slow on the uptake. Why has there been a loss? I mean, I'm hearing that there has been a loss, but why has there been a loss?
So we hold units within the property fund, and the value of those units, values of the properties that the fund hold, has decreased from when we initially purchased them. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? No. On that basis, there are 3 recommendations for the committee. Note that the general fund revenue outturn of 132,000 overspend to be funded from the general reserve, and note the capital outturn position and improve carry forward budgets of 358,000, and receive the 24-25 draft statement of accounts. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you, David, proposing, and anyone seconding? Sue, thank you very much. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, and carried. Right, item 13. Brian, I think this is you, the annual governance statement 24-25.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an annual report that comes up to members for approval. It did come up originally as part of the May agenda in line so that we could get the 24-25 accounts published on time. The version that came up in May was a draft version because obviously we did not have the 23-24 accounts signed off or their auditor's report. So again, this report is now just updating that original document that you would have seen and signed off on to incorporate the additional recommendations that Paul highlighted earlier in the 23-24 auditors report and completion report. And obviously it's just for members to re-acknowledge and approve, and obviously it wouldn't be incorporated into the final set of accounts that will be coming up in February next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Any comments or questions around the room? No. That's an easy one. There is one recommendation for this item, which is on 402 of the agenda pack. And that recommendation is that members review and comment on the final annual governance statement for 24-25. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer Bob and seconder Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour? That is unanimous. Carried. Thank you. Item 14. I think this is you again, Brian. The Treasury Management 24-25 outturn.
Thank you, Chair. So members will probably remember they get 3 reports a year on the Treasury Management function. They'll have a report at February as part of the budget report that sets the Treasury strategy for the year, for the coming year. You have a mid-year report around November, December time each year on the first 6 months. And then this is the outturn report for 24-25. It will go on to full council for formal approval, but again, this committee is here to scrutinise this report before it goes on to full council. I think the highlights here to say is that it is around the compliance section on page 215, which confirms that we have not breached any of our indicators that were set by council back in February 24. Obviously the report highlights where we spent our, well, in relation to our capital expenditure, how much we have borrowed to fund the capital programme for 24-25, and that's then provides us with our CFR, capital financing requirements, which is how much we've actually needed to borrow to fund our capital programme. We obviously may not necessarily borrow that all amount, but the CFR is what we would eventually need to borrow if we don't have internal funds. Our borrowing as at the end of March 25 is 64 million, which increased from 53 million back in March 24. Our investments have slightly improved since last year. So at the end of March 25, it was 39 million compared to 34 million at the end of March 2024. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brian. Questions, comments by members around the room? Nick?
It's always my favourite report, this one. It's impenetrable to a certain extent. But I suppose the question is, you mentioned the indicators there, and it's just whether there are any indicators that are moving in a direction we should be worried about.
No, I think obviously the key ones for me is that we don't reach the authorised limit or the operational boundary. So the authorised limit is the maximum we can actually borrow, which is again agreed by council, and it's based on what our capital programme is saying with a bit of a contingency. The operational boundary is more the likely position we think we will be at the year end, which you'll note from the report is below the operational boundary. So, you know, we are in a good position from that perspective.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay. 14. Sorry, yes. So there is one recommendation, page 439 of the agenda pack. Is that right? That is right, isn't it? That recommendation is members examine and comment on the Treasury Management outturn and potential indicators for 24-25. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer, Jeffrey, thank you, and a seconder, Sue. Thank you very much. Can I have a show of hands? Those in favour, and that is unanimous again and carried. Thank you. Now we're on 15. So 15 is Alison this time. So that's the financial management 25-26 Q1 forecast.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the forecast out position for 25-26 as at Q1. As at 30th of June, a revenue overspend of £789,000 is forecast. Of this, £888,000 relates to variances against the net cost of services budget. Appendix B to the report shows significant variances by directorate. These variances are being monitored by leadership team on a monthly basis. A net £99,000 favourable variance is forecast against interest received and paid by the council. This is mainly due to better interest rates being received on the council's investments than budgeted. Savings proposals of £3.4 million were built into the net cost of services budget in 25-26. In the table in paragraph 1.2 shows progress made in achieving these savings. Of the 3.4 million, nearly 3.1 million will be achieved in full in the year. Just under £200,000 will not be realised in full in the year, as highlighted in amber, and just under £130,000 highlighted in red are being reviewed as to whether they are achievable. The revised capital programme budget for 25-26 is £11.25 million. It's forecast that there will be an underspend of around £637,000 in 25-26. This is due to there being no current requirement for the capital contingency budget and underspends against the Old River Lane budget and the ICT rolling programme budget. Also included in the report is the outstanding debt position as at the end of July compared to 31st of March 2025. This shows a reduction in the debt outstanding of just under £700,000 between these two dates. Whilst the outstanding debt is a constantly moving position, I'd like to highlight that in line with the Council's debt management policy, just under £510,000 of debt has been written off, and large stage debts with a single customer of just under £700,000 have been collected. This reduction in the volume of debts outstanding will allow the team to focus efforts on collectible debts moving forward. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Alison. Comments, questions around the floor? Bob?
Right, I've got a question on debt. I mean, I think most people reading the debt schedule in Appendix D would say that it doesn't look good. And one of the things that really stands out is the proportion and amount of debt that's old. You know, let's just be kind and say it's around about 1 million. It's more than 1 million, isn't it? It's a lot of money for very old debt. So where are we with this old debt? Why is it there? And if I might also say, you deal with this separately, that obviously I've noted that the debt figure has changed, not least because £512,000 of debt's been written off. Well, that's a pretty big write-off as well. So can you just broadly tell us why it looks as though we have a very intransigent long-term debt, and give us some indication of what's covered by the £500,000 odd that's been written off, please?
So the debt over 180 days of just over £1 million. Sorry, backtrack to start. So the first part of the process in reviewing the age debt, we all acknowledge that there's been an issue with the age debt and collection of debt. The first part of the process was looking at the oldest debt first and clearing out things which were not collectible due to either bankruptcy of businesses that have been invoiced, whether they've not actually received the service. So a complete review of all debts was undertaken of everything that was over a year old to ensure that we were able to focus on debt that's actually collectible and put the processes in place to collect that debt in. So the 512,000 is made up of a lot of smaller amounts of debt where those aren't actually collectible, to try and get those off the book so we can move forward and focus then on this £1 million of debt that's over 180 days old. So within there are some large amounts which are being chased by legal at the moment. Obviously, I can't go into details of individual cases. There are also then smaller debts which are being actively pursued by age to make sure that we are collecting those where we can, and arrangements being put in place with customers to make sure we are collecting in those amounts of money.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I mean, I hear what you say, but with all due respect, and it's nothing personal, that doesn't make me feel any better about these numbers. I mean, to write £500,000 of debt off is a very big write-off. And you know, the obvious rhetorical question is what we could have done with the 500,000 if we'd actually recovered it. And to have debt of over 6 months old of in excess of £1 million is just a huge amount of money. Am I right that I spotted in the procurement paper a reference to something to do with a debt team or something of that nature? And the reason I ask that is because, you know, this is something that comes up. We've talked about this at this committee before, and what has been said on a number of occasions essentially is that it's taken time to get to grips with debt, and that a team is, you know, in the process of being put together. Well, you know, has that team been put together or not? That's obviously a reference sideways to the procurement paper. But broadly, you know, what are we doing to stop having debt of 6 months or older which exceeds £1 million?
Brian.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of work needs to be done and has been done over the last 6 months since I've been here. We are constantly working on that. We do obviously each year have to procure for bad debt provision. So within our accounts, all what's been written off so far this year has been accounted for, and obviously is not an impact on this year's. It's obviously impact on our balance sheet position. We have collected a number of substantial debts. We are in the process of getting more. We are hopeful that during this year there might even be a release of some of that provision at the year end because we are collecting that debt. Unfortunately, there is obviously debt that is old, and obviously where we cannot legally take it through courts because we might not have the evidence or the backing papers to support that. That is obviously something we are learning from, and obviously making sure going forward we have a process in place to make sure that, you know, when a debt is raised that is due to the authority, that we have the evidence to support that, and that therefore a quicker, more efficient process is carried out whereby it will go on to legal in a lot more quickly process rather than a time-consuming exercise. So again, I can't really comment too much on why we've got to this position. Obviously, I don't think this is unique for East Arts, where I've been in other organisations. These level of debts are similar, I would say, from other organisations I've been at. I think COVID did have a big impact on all debts, and I'm not just talking sundry debts, which these are, but obviously council tax, business rates. It's all been impacted by obviously a delay in taking court action over time. Now, obviously, we've moved away from COVID, but we're still playing some kind of catch up with courts in getting time for us to be able to take individuals, debtors to court. So again, it's a process that we are extremely keen to move on with, and obviously try to collect as much as possible.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Chair. One more. I'm not very good at this. I'm trying to go back to the procurement paper to see if there was something in there.
Yes, I'm happy to come back. So
can you help me with that? So my question obviously is in part historic, because to repeat, it has been said to us on a number of occasions that, you know, a team needs to be put together, and it's all happening. Has it happened, or has it not happened? And therefore, what is the procurement thing that's underway in relation to debt?
Yep. So we do have a team within the finance function to obviously look at these debts and obviously try to collect in as much as possible. In relation to the procurement paper, that related to parking and to revs and bends, which use those kind of organisations to, you know, look to collect debt that way. Obviously, there might be an opportunity for us at some point to incorporate the sundry debts into that process as well. But like I said, we need to make sure we go through each debt, make sure we can evidence that the debt is owed to us. And again, you know, processes may not always been great in the past, but again, we are looking at how we can improve that process go forward over, you know, this has happened over many, many years. So again, you know, there are two separate operations in that. We've got our own debt team for sundry debts, but in relation to revs and bends and parking, we use more of an outsource kind of service.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry, Chair. I really am trying not to keep asking questions. I apologise to you. On the procurement paper, there's a line for parking enforcement. There's a separate line, a bit higher up the paper, for, and it may be I misread this, it meant for debt recovery agency. I don't know whether that should really mean debt or okay, so it's debt. So we've got two different items on the procurement paper. And my question to Alison and yourself, Brian, is mainly relative to the debt recovery item at the top of the schedule of items.
Yeah, Alison.
So the debt recovery agency on page 237, you're talking, aren't you, at the top of that page, which is the revenues and benefits and the parking services that are procuring that contract, where obviously we will pass debt out for them to collect on our behalf. And you said there's another one, did you say?
No, that's
Just the parking enforcement contract is the procurement of the contract to issue PCN, so to patrol the car parks and on the street and things like that. So it's a separate contract. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nick?
And just a quick point on the savings proposals. So 3.4 million that was built into the budget around the saving proposals, and the fact that 3.1 million of that is green, and I guess that's in the comments, so that we're confident that that will be delivered in the year. I think so. From memory, when we discussed that 3.4, there were some fairly challenging items in there. So to see 3.1 in green is really positive. That does leave, of course, point. So that's 300,000 in amber and red, which less confidence in delivery. And I'm assuming that then feeds through into the forecast variance of £750,000 for the year. So some of that will be feeding through there. So my question is, and there's a sort of reference to the fact that the exec will be looking and thinking about it, but I suppose what action's been taken around the fact that there's a £750,000 overspend, and what additional savings are being considered or income opportunities to bridge that gap?
So in relation to the savings, yes, generally not too bad at 3.1. In relation to the amber, I'm confident that they will come through, but there's been a delay in actually achieving, so they're more likely to be achieved in 26, 27, which has an impact on the 25, 26. In relation to the red ones, they will be looked at as part of the MTFFP medium-term financial plan that will be coming up to executive in October next month, where obviously we've been through all the savings for 25, 26, plus what's been proposed for future years. We really looked at all of them to ascertain what we feel will be achievable and what we don't think may be achievable. And you'll note in that report that there'll be a number where we are looking to take out of through the MTFFB process. So again, it puts a pressure on future years' potential funding gaps. And obviously you'll see as that report comes up and it's now published, there is a funding gap that we need to find for 26, 27 that we are now working through. And obviously we had a session this morning with leadership team around possible options of how that savings can be achieved. And that will come through at a later date to members for consideration. In relation to the in-year pressure, yes, we have got a £700,000 pressure. We've been given that at an early stage, so we've got opportunity to work with the services to try to mitigate as much as possible. Just to give you an example, one of the pressures that we reported in the Q1 is around parking. That's already improved from that position, but obviously there might well be other stuff going the other way. So it's obviously the ownership of the directorate to try to bring those back into line as much as possible. There might well be some obviously corporate activities that might come along later in the year that might help with that process. But yeah, it is a concern. I'm obviously working closely with leadership team to try to mitigate that as much as possible. But we will obviously keep members abreast as part of the Q2 that we're now preparing work on, and obviously in future periods as well. Sorry, just on that, there is a couple of pressure that is being reported in the Q1 that again will be fed into the medium-term financial plan. That again, we realise that it's a pressure we can't do nothing about. We just got to build it in. So again, that has been proposed as part of that report that will come up to executive in October.
Great, thank you. Reassuring to hear that those challenges are happening.
Thank you, Nick. Any more questions or points for Brian or Alison? No? Okay. Thank you for that. There are two recommendations, page 454 of the agenda pack, and those two are note and consider the net revenue budget end of year projected overspend of 789,000, and to note and consider the capital programme forecast outturn of £637,000. Could I please have a proposer and a seconder? Sue proposing, thank you very much. And David seconding, thank you very much too. A show of hands, those in favour? That is unanimous and carried, thank you. No, not quite the last item. So Brian, yes, agenda item 16, strategic risk register monitoring, Q1 25-26.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first quarter for this year. Members will obviously be aware that now they do get regular quarterly updates around our corporate risk register. There's two recommendations on here. One is to obviously note the position for Q1. There has been no changes in relation to any new risks being added or deleted. The only change to the risk register is around a scoring of one of our risks that has gone down from a C2 to a C3, I believe. And that is due to obviously we now moved into a new waste contract, and the risk, the financial risk of that failing is obviously reduced now in our eyes. The other part of the recommendation is around members approving the risk management strategy as Appendix B. This hasn't been to members for a number of years, but it should be an annual process that come to members for them just to set the guidelines and the guidance around how we should look at our risk management and how we identify risks, assess and manage those risks. The only change from the previously approved strategy was in relation to the scoring matrix, which in the past, before my time, it was on a 3x3 matrix, but we now move to a 4x4. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brian. Questions, comments? David.
Just one, it might just be a typo or me misreading it, but on page 446, it says on the 31st of March, the authority had net borrowing / investments of X million arising. Is that something that's supposed to be populated in there? 446, yeah, under local context.
Yeah, I think that's the previous paper, but
okay,
probably still relevant, but
yeah, sorry,
missed the boat on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm probably reading the wrong thing. I apologize. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions for this? No. So on that basis, there are two recommendations on 466, as Brian said. Those recommendations are the 25-26 Q1 corporate risk register and actions being taken to control and mitigate risk be noted, and the risk management strategy be reviewed and approved. Could I please have a proposer and a seconder? Proposer Mora and seconder Jeffrey, thank you. And a show of hands, those in favour? That is unanimous, thank you very much, and carried. Item 17, audit and governance to work programme, and this nearly is the last one. So yes.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the audit programme. Obviously, Appendix A is showing members what is coming up over the remaining year in relation to reports. I think probably the bit on a highlight is, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be bringing to November committee the update on the recommendations from our external auditors, and obviously there will also be a BEAM update from them as well. The other bit to mention in relation to the Appendix A is that we've moved the January Audit and Governance Committee to February as a new date, and in for January on that same date we've got a Audit and Governance and over and scrutiny joint committee to consider the budget as we have done in previous years. In relation to Appendix B, which is looking at the proposed timelines or meetings for 26-27, obviously there's been a lot of discussions since I've been here around there's a lot of papers going on the agendas. So again, I've moved it now to or proposed to move it to a 5 meeting a year, plus the joint ONS and A&G scrutiny report for budgets. I'm also keen to bring a early audit and governance meeting in July, so that we can pick up all the old year papers nice and early, so that we can then focus on the in-year going forward, rather than waiting until September when you get the outturn and all the 24-25 all the previous year's papers, which is almost too far gone. So hopefully that's everyone's happy with that, but happy to take any comments or any proposed changes.
Excellent, thank you very much, Brian. Comments, questions? Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Brian for doing this work on looking at the forward programs. I think that what he's suggesting, I think, will indeed be very, very helpful and very productive. So many thanks indeed.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Sue?
Yeah, there was a slot for training in this meeting, which was probably a bit bit much for us to take on. There's a slot for November. Have you got any suggestions of topics that we could cover? I know we're supposed to nominate them, but
there are a number that we need to provide each year. There's obviously the treasury management one that is obviously open to all members, because obviously it's a council report that approves those, but again it's important for audit and governance members to attend. And obviously there'll be items around the internal audit, anti-fraud. Other ones we could consider is around risk management, which is obviously maybe quite an interesting one for members to be aware of. And then obviously there's open to suggestions for any others.
I'd be interested in internal audit training. Don't know if about anyone else.
I think that's planned at some point. Michelle, do you remember? Or no? Okay, I can go away and speak to Simon, and we can arrange that. Whether that'll be either at the beginning of the audit committee or a separate meeting, we can obviously determine what is best. I mean, if members got preference on whether they want it to be face to face or on Teams, or at the beginning of the meeting or a separate meeting. Again, I've been in organisations where some prefer it at the beginning of the meeting, so that you're all in one go, but others prefer it to be separated, because obviously genders can be quite heavy.
Thank you. Just a quick show of hands then on that basis. So if it is done Teams remotely, would you guys be happy, or do you want to do a face-to-face? Yeah.
It's worked well as part of the meeting before.
So first
other people think.
So first item on the agenda, as under the previous section 151 officer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, comments? Nick?
I like the idea of having a conversation around risk policy and registers and how it's applied. Just on that, the risk register always is the very last item on the agenda, and I just feel sometimes that having a more robust conversation around that would be quite valuable. I mentioned cybersecurity once or twice today, and it appears quite a lot, and we've got an item in the agenda next on cyber. Just as an example, there's not a lot on the risk register around cybersecurity, and it's actually scored quite low in terms of the residual risk. So it just feels like one where with more time to discuss the register, it might just highlight one or two things. So, but just a suggestion really as to whether a couple of times a year to have the risk register higher up the agenda, so we give it a bit more time and focus, I think might be valuable.
Yeah, no, that's possible. Obviously, we try to get the people who come along for one report on the agenda first, so they can go off, rather than myself and Alison, who's here for the whole meeting. But yeah, we can bring it up at least to midpoint, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Nick. Bob?
I'd just like to say, I think Nick's comment or suggestion is a really good one. I was a bit embarrassed I didn't think of that myself. But while the point's on the floor, and you won't be prepared for this, so I don't mind if you say you don't know, but do you know how many attacks do we receive, this council, do we receive a year? When I was up the hill, I came to know that the number of attacks received up the hill is enormous. It's a permanent job to keep these people at bay. So do you know what our
Yes, and you will probably find out at the next meeting, because Matt Canterford, who's our head of IT for the shared service with Stevenage and East Herts, he will be here for a cyber update. So we do get regular updates at leadership team around obviously the impact on attacks on our systems. It's more the denial of service kind of attacks where they bombard it with the same kind of like queries, and obviously it then tries to knock the system down. But yeah, he's got all that evidence and supporting documents, which he obviously will be able to, no doubt, provide you with at that meeting.
Thank you. It's probably going to be a part 2 thing, you think? Yeah, yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments before we go to vote? No? Okay, there's the single recommendation. Oh, no, how could I get that wrong? There are 3 recommendations detailed on page 489 of the agenda pack, and those recommendations are to approve the finance and audit work programme for 25-26 municipal years, as outlined in the report. Note and provide comments on the proposed meeting schedule for the 26-27 municipal year, and finally to identify any training requirements to support members in fulfilling their role effectively. Could I have a proposer and seconder? Proposer Bob, seconder Jeffrey, and a show of hands, those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And the final item. Urgent items. Is there any urgent items at this point in time? No urgent items. So on that basis, at 20:51, according to my PC, I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.